The boardroom froze as Daniel Cole stood up, his janitor's uniform stark against executive suits. Blood pounded in his ears. "Don't sign the $4.2 billion deal," he said, voice stronger than intended. Cameras flashed outside. Reporters awaited the historic acquisition. Alexis Monroe, 34-year-old CEO of Monroe Industries, locked eyes with him. Her pen hovered over the contract. Security moved toward Daniel. His daughter's future hung in the balance. The former Wall Street prodigy, now cleaning floors, had exactly 10 seconds before being dragged out. Alexis raised her hand, stopping security. "Everyone out," she commanded, "except him. Stay with us until the end to discover the shocking truth behind this confrontation and what happens when these two worlds collide." The evening before, Daniel Cole moved silently through the executive floor of Monroe Industries, emptying trash bins as he'd done for the past 18 months. The pristine hallways felt different at night, empty of the power suits and clicking heels, devoid of the artificial smiles and calculated handshakes. He preferred it this way. The silence was honest, at least. He paused outside the conference room, noticing the lights still on. Most executives had left hours ago, but through the frosted glass he could make out a solitary figure. He recognized her silhouette immediately. Alexis Monroe, the wunderkind CEO who had taken over her father's company at just 30 years old. Stories about her brilliance and ruthlessness filled the break room gossip, though Daniel rarely participated. He had learned the hard way that staying invisible was the safest strategy. For a moment, he stood watching her work, struck by how similar her hunched-over posture was to his own daughter when concentrating on homework. The thought of 9-year-old Ava, waiting at Mrs. Jenkins' apartment, made him check his watch. He needed to finish his shift and pick her up before 10. Daniel pushed his cart forward, intending to skip the room and return later, when a stack of papers slid from the conference table to the floor, followed by Alexis's frustrated sigh. Professional habit took over, and he knocked softly. "Excuse me, ma'am, would you like me to come back later?" Her head snapped up, surprise flashing across her face, as though she'd forgotten other humans existed in the building. "No, it's fine. Come in." Her voice carried the slight edge of someone interrupted mid-thought. As Daniel entered, Alexis gathered her documents hastily, dropping several in the process. He moved to help, bending down to collect the scattered papers. That's when he saw it, a spreadsheet with highlighted columns showing employee counts across multiple divisions. One column labeled "Post-Acquisition Reductions" caught his eye. Numbers in cold red showing thousands of positions marked for elimination after the TechVision merger, including the entire janitorial staff of the Chicago office. Daniel's breath caught as he recognized his department code among those slated for outsourcing. His fingers tightened on the paper, memory flashing to Ava's medical bills, piled on his kitchen table, the overdue rent notice, the insulin prescription that needed refilling next week. The modest stability he'd built after losing everything was about to crumble again. "Thank you," Alexis said, reaching for the papers, but Daniel hesitated, his eyes still fixed on the document. She followed his gaze, understanding dawning on her face. "That's confidential information," she said, her tone hardening. "Of course, sorry," Daniel replied, handing over the papers with a deliberately blank expression he'd perfected during his downfall 3 years ago. As he turned to leave, Alexis called after him. "You're Daniel, right? Night shift?" He paused, surprised she knew his name. "Yes, ma'am." She studied him for a moment, then dismissed him with a nod. "Good night, then." He finished his shift on autopilot, mind racing. By morning, he'd made his decision. It wasn't just about his job anymore. It was about all the families who would suffer while executives collected bonuses. Some things were worth the risk, worth standing up for, even when you had everything to lose. Daniel Cole still had one thing left from his Wall Street days: the knowledge of how these deals really worked and what they really cost. The morning of the signing arrived with media fanfare. Security was tight, but as a familiar face in maintenance, Daniel slipped through the service entrance unquestioned. He changed into his uniform in the small locker room, fingers trembling slightly as he buttoned his shirt. In his pocket, he carried the employee roster he'd printed from the maintenance computer, showing families, years of service, medical dependents, the human cost behind the numbers. Would it matter to someone like Alexis Monroe? Probably not. But he had to try. For Ava. For himself. For the part of him that died when he chose silence once before. When he entered the boardroom, timed precisely 5 minutes before the signing, nobody even glanced his way. The invisibility of service workers played in his favor now. He positioned himself by the water cooler, watching board members and executives congratulate each other, cameras flashing outside. Alexis sat at the head of the table, impeccable in a tailored navy suit. Her signature copper hair pulled back severely. She looked confident, but Daniel noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted occasionally to her CFO, James Bennett, who hovered nearby like an anxious shadow. When the documents were placed before her, something in her hesitation gave Daniel the final push he needed. He stepped forward into the silence that fell as Alexis lifted her pen. After her command emptied the room, Daniel stood facing Alexis across the polished table, security guards waiting just outside the door. The contract lay between them, unsigned. "You have exactly 1 minute," she said, her voice low and controlled, "to explain why I shouldn't have you arrested for disrupting this meeting." Daniel met her gaze steadily. "Because you already know something's wrong with this deal. I saw your hesitation." He placed the employee roster on the table. 4,722 people. Not numbers on a spreadsheet. People with families, medical needs, mortgages. The projections Bennett showed you are manipulated. The cost savings come entirely from gutting the workforce while inflating executive compensation packages. He watched her eyes narrow, calculating. "How would a janitor know that?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Because before I cleaned offices, I analyzed mergers for Goldman Sachs, until I refused to sign off on a deal like this one 3 years ago." Alexis's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. She reached for the employee roster, scanning it quickly. "Even if what you're saying is true, the board has unanimously approved this acquisition. The papers are waiting for my signature." Daniel held her gaze. "The real financial model show TechVision is overvalued by at least 30%. Their innovation pipeline is empty. I found their R&D reports in the recycling bin. They're selling you a shell, and your board knows it." The color drained from Alexis's face. "That's a serious accusation." Daniel nodded. "One that's worth losing my job over, apparently." A tense silence stretched between them. Finally, Alexis pressed the intercom. "Tell everyone the signing is postponed for 24 hours due to a technical matter. No questions." She turned back to Daniel. "My penthouse, 8 o'clock tonight. Bring whatever evidence you have. If you're wasting my time, I'll make sure you never work in this city again." As security escorted him from the building, Daniel felt the weight of what he'd done settle on his shoulders. He'd likely lost his job regardless of what happened next. On the bus ride home, he called Mrs. Jenkins to ask if she could watch Ava for a few more hours tonight. The elderly woman agreed, though her concerned questions about his early return from work were harder to deflect. At his small apartment, Daniel dug through the storage boxes he'd never fully unpacked, finding his old financial analysis software on a dusty laptop. 3 years had passed, but some skills never left you. By 7:30, he had compiled enough analysis to support his claims. He changed into the only decent clothes he still owned, a white shirt and navy slacks that hung slightly loose on his frame, and headed to the address Alexis had provided. Her penthouse occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown high-rise. The security guard called up, and Daniel was surprised when Alexis herself answered, instructing them to send him up immediately. The elevator ride gave him time to doubt everything: his analysis, his decision, his sanity for confronting one of the most powerful women in Chicago business. When the doors opened directly into her penthouse, he stepped into a space that was simultaneously breathtaking and strangely empty. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city lights, but the minimal furniture and lack of personal touches made it feel more like a hotel suite than a home. Alexis stood by the windows, still in her business attire, a glass of amber liquid in her hand. "Right on time," she noted, gesturing toward the dining table where several monitors were set up. "Show me what you have." Without pleasantries, they dove into the numbers. Daniel explained the discrepancies he'd found, the hidden liabilities, the inflated projections. As he walked her through his analysis, he saw her sharp mind at work, questioning, challenging, connecting dots. 2 hours passed in intense discussion, during which Daniel almost forgot the vast gulf that separated their current lives. Almost. Until his phone rang. Mrs. Jenkins, her voice worried. Ava's fever had spiked again. "I have to go," he said, gathering his things hastily. "My daughter's sick." Alexis looked up, the human concern on her face momentarily replacing the CEO mask. "Is it serious?" Daniel hesitated, then admitted, "She has type 1 diabetes. Her blood sugar's been unstable since." He stopped himself. "I just need to get home." He was halfway to the elevator when Alexis called after him. "Wait, let me drive you." Before he could protest, she had grabbed her keys and coat. The incongruity of the situation hit him as they descended in the elevator, the CEO of Monroe Industries and her janitor, heading to his run-down apartment building in her luxury SUV. The 20-minute drive passed mostly in silence, broken only by Daniel's directions. When they pulled up outside his building, paint peeling, security door propped open with a brick, Daniel felt a flush of shame he immediately resented. This was his life now, and he refused to apologize for it. "Thank you for the ride," he said formally, moving to exit the vehicle. But Alexis surprised him by turning off the engine and unbuckling her seatbelt. "I'm coming in. If your daughter needs medical attention, I can help." The apartment was small but meticulously organized, the discipline of a single parent evident in every carefully arranged corner. Mrs. Jenkins met them at the door, confusion crossing her face at the sight of the elegantly dressed woman behind Daniel. Her explanation was cut short by Ava's whimper from the bedroom. Daniel rushed to his daughter, finding her flushed and disoriented, her glucose monitor showing dangerously high numbers. "We need to get her to a hospital," he said, the tightness in his chest having nothing to do with his confrontation earlier that day. "I'll call an ambulance," Alexis offered, already reaching for her phone. Daniel shook his head, the calculation immediate and habitual. "The deductible for ambulance transport is $2,000. I'll drive her." He didn't add that his insurance had lapsed the previous month, that this hospital visit would add to his mountain of medical debt. Something in his expression must have communicated these unspoken facts, because Alexis simply said, "I'm taking you both to Northwestern Memorial, now." Her tone brooked no argument, and minutes later, they were speeding through the nighttime streets, Ava bundled in a blanket on Daniel's lap. At the hospital, Alexis spoke quietly to the intake nurse, and suddenly they were being ushered into a private room, a team of doctors appearing within minutes. Daniel sat beside his daughter's bed, holding her small hand while medical staff worked efficiently around them. Alexis remained in the background, a silent sentinel, making calls in hushed tones. Hours passed, and gradually Ava's condition stabilized. As dawn broke, she finally fell into a peaceful sleep. In the quiet of early morning, Daniel and Alexis sat in uncomfortable chairs outside Ava's room, exhaustion etching lines on both their faces. A nurse brought coffee, which they accepted gratefully. "Why did you help us?" Daniel finally asked, the question that had burned in his mind all night. Alexis stared into her coffee cup. "Maybe I'm tired of living in a world where decisions are made without seeing the consequences." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Or maybe I just wanted to know how someone goes from Wall Street to pushing a janitor's cart." The invitation to explain hung between them. Daniel hadn't told this story to anyone since arriving in Chicago, had buried it under the daily struggle of survival. But something about the night they'd just shared, the raw humanity of it, broke through his carefully constructed walls. "I was a rising star at Goldman," he began quietly. "I specialize in tech sector mergers. 4 years ago, I was lead analyst on a major acquisition, very similar to your TechVision deal. I found irregularities, projected massive layoffs disguised as synergy optimization. When I brought it to my supervisors, they told me to fix the numbers, not the deal." He rubbed his tired eyes. "I refused. Then my wife, Laura, was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. Suddenly I had medical bills, a terrified 6-year-old daughter, and a choice to make." Alexis listened intently, her expression unreadable. "I chose my family over my principles. Revised the analysis, the deal went through. Thousands lost their jobs, but I kept mine. For 6 more months anyway. Then they found a reason to let me go, just after Laura died. No severance, insurance canceled, reputation destroyed. The bitterness he'd thought long buried seeped into his voice. The universe has a perverse sense of justice. Alexis was silent for a long moment. And yet, knowing the cost, you still spoke up yesterday. Daniel glanced toward Ava's room. Maybe I needed her to know her father could still do the right thing, even when it's hard. The admission felt raw, vulnerable in a way financial disclosures hadn't. Alexis nodded slowly. I built my career being tougher, smarter, more ruthless than any man in the room. My father taught me that sentiment is weakness in business. She paused. But lately I've been wondering what the point of it all is. Empty penthouse, no life outside the office, decisions that look brilliant on paper but keep me awake at night. Morning light spilled through the hospital windows, illuminating the shadows under her eyes. I never see the Daniel Coles of my decisions, until now. By afternoon, Ava was well enough to be discharged. Daniel braced himself for the bill, but was told everything had been taken care of. Outside the hospital, Alexis's driver waited with her car. I need to get back to the office, she said. The board is in panic mode over the delayed signing. She handed Daniel a business card with her personal number written on the back. I want to continue our discussion about tech vision. In the meantime, take a few days off to be with Ava. Your job is secure. The professional mask had returned, but something had shifted beneath it. Daniel accepted the card wordlessly, torn between gratitude and pride. As they parted ways, Ava looked back at Alexis. Will you come visit us again? She asked with a child's directness. Alexis seemed startled by the question. I would like that, she answered, a genuine smile softening her features for the first time. The days that followed held an air of suspended reality. Daniel received a call from HR confirming his paid leave, while Ava recovered quickly, her resilience constantly amazing him. They spent quiet evenings together, reading and playing board games, carefully not discussing what would happen when he returned to work. Then, 5 days after the hospital night, everything shattered. Daniel was preparing dinner when a breaking news alert flashed on his phone. Monroe Industries' acquisition of Tech Vision in jeopardy, CEO questioning deal. Minutes later, his phone rang. Alexis, her voice tight. They're coming after you. Bennett discovered you accessed company files. There's a police report filed for corporate espionage and data theft. Don't go anywhere. I'm sending my lawyer to you. Before Daniel could fully process this, heavy knocking rattled his apartment door. 2 police officers stood outside, warrant in hand. As they led him away in handcuffs, he caught a glimpse of Ava's terrified face as Mrs. Jenkins held her back. It's going to be okay, sweetheart, he called, trying to keep his voice steady. Call Miss Monroe. The next hours passed in a blur of holding cells and interrogation rooms. Daniel answered questions mechanically, refusing to speak further without legal representation. By nightfall, he sat alone in a sparse interview room, exhaustion and fear fighting for dominance in his mind. What had he been thinking? Challenging people with this kind of power? How would Ava cope if he went to prison? The door opened, and to his shock, Alexis Monroe walked in, followed by a distinguished older man carrying a leather briefcase. Mr. Hargrove is the best defense attorney in Chicago, she said without preamble. You're being released on bail, which has already been posted. Daniel stared at her, disbelief warring with cautious hope. Why would you do this? Bennett's your CFO? The board is your responsibility. Alexis's expression hardened. Because they lied to me. After our conversation, I had an independent firm quietly review the Tech Vision financials. Everything you said was true, and worse. Bennett and Harlow have been accepting kickbacks to push this deal through. She placed her designer coat around his shoulders as they walked toward the exit, the gesture bizarrely intimate amid the sterile police station surrounding. The board is trying to force me out now. Tomorrow's emergency shareholder meeting will decide both our fates. Outside, her car waited. Ava's at my penthouse with my personal assistant. I thought she'd be more comfortable there than with neighbors or in emergency care. The thoughtfulness of this action, amid all the corporate warfare she was navigating, struck Daniel deeply. As they drove through nighttime Chicago, Alexis outlined the battle ahead. They're painting you as a disgruntled ex-finance professional with a vendetta. They've already leaked your Goldman termination to the press. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. And you? Where do you stand in all this? Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. I have to decide by morning whether to sign the deal and keep my position or fight the board and likely lose everything my father built. The question hung unspoken between them. Was principle worth the cost? When they arrived at the penthouse, Ava launched herself into Daniel's arms with a sob of relief. Over her head he mouthed, "Thank you," to Alexis, who nodded once before stepping away to give them privacy. Later, after Ava had fallen asleep in the guest bedroom, Daniel found Alexis on the balcony, staring out at the city lights. "I keep thinking about what you said in the hospital," she began without turning around, "about needing your daughter to know you could do the right thing, even when it's hard." She finally faced him. "No one has ever seen me make that kind of choice. My father would say the right choice is whatever protects the company. The board measures right choices in stock prices and quarterly returns." Daniel moved to stand beside her at the railing. "And what do you think?" Alexis's laugh held no humor. "I think I'm terrified of finding out who I am without the title of CEO." Morning came too quickly. Daniel wore a borrowed suit to the shareholder meeting, sitting in the back while Alexis faced the assembled board and major investors. James Bennett presented his case first, explaining away the misunderstanding with carefully crafted slides showing projected growth and synergies. Richard Harlow, the board chairman, spoke of regrettable personnel issues and confidential information breaches, his gaze finding Daniel with barely concealed contempt. And Daniel hadn't spoken since he'd said. Then it was Alexis's turn. She stood, straightened her jacket, and walked to the podium carrying only a single sheet of paper. "For 7 years, I've dedicated my life to this company," she began. "In that time, our market value has tripled, our workforce has grown by 60%, and our reputation for integrity has been my highest priority." She paused, looking directly at Bennett and Harlow. "That integrity is why I cannot, in good conscience, sign the TechVision acquisition agreement as currently structured." Murmurs rippled through the room. "The financial models presented to this board are fundamentally flawed and deliberately misleading. The promised returns rely entirely on workforce decimation and asset stripping, not innovation or growth." She laid out the evidence methodically, her voice gaining strength with each point. When she finished, she placed her single sheet of paper on the podium, her resignation letter. "If this deal proceeds as planned, it will be without my participation or endorsement. I refuse to build success on the broken lives of our employees." The room erupted in chaos as she stepped away from the microphone. Hours later, after votes and counteroffers and heated closed-door discussions, the outcome crystallized. The deal was dead, but so was Alexis's role as CEO. She retained her substantial shareholding and a board seat, but leadership would transition to a successor within 30 days. Daniel, for his part, received no criminal charges but also no triumphant return to Monroe Industries. As they left the corporate headquarters together that evening, both professionally adrift, Alexis surprised Daniel by laughing, a genuine, unburdened sound. "You know what's strange? I feel lighter than I have in years." Daniel understood completely. Freedom often feels that way, even when it comes at a cost. They walked without destination through the early summer evening, two people abruptly untethered from their defined roles in the world. 3 weeks later, Daniel knelt in the small community garden behind his apartment building, showing Ava how to test the soil for their tomato plants. His phone rang, Alexis, calling with her daily update. Since the shareholders' meeting, they'd been working together on a new venture, a responsible investment fund focusing on companies with sustainable labor practices. Daniel's financial expertise paired surprisingly well with Alexis's industry connections and vision. Their first project, creating an employee ownership structure for a division of TechVision that would have been gutted in the acquisition. "The funding came through," Alexis announced without preamble. "We can present the offer next week." Daniel smiled, watching Ava carefully water their seedlings. "That's 200 jobs saved," he said quietly. "A good start." Alexis's voice softened. "Are you both still coming for dinner tonight? I tried that pasta recipe you mentioned." The casual domesticity of the question struck Daniel. How quickly their lives had intertwined. How naturally Alexis had carved out space for them in her world, and they for her in theirs. "Wouldn't miss it. Ava's made you something, by the way." She won't tell me what it is. His daughter grinned up at him secretively, soil smudged on her cheek. After hanging up, Daniel returned to their gardening, reflecting on the unlikely path that had led them here. The professional partnership with Alexis was evolving into something deeper, though neither had put words to it yet. There was time for that, for all of it. That evening, in Alexis's penthouse, now warmed with books, plants, and the occasional toy left behind by Ava, they celebrated their small victory over takeout containers and financial projections spread across the coffee table. Ava presented her gift to Alexis, a drawing of 3 figures standing beside a garden full of impossibly large vegetables, a sun smiling down on them. "It's us," she explained unnecessarily, pointing to each figure. "You, me, and Dad. And our garden, but bigger, because it's going to grow." Alexis's eyes glistened as she hugged the girl. Over Ava's head, her gaze met Daniel's, a world of unspoken feeling passing between them. They were building something here, something neither of them had dared imagine during that tense boardroom confrontation months ago. 6 months after the failed acquisition, life had found a new rhythm. Phoenix Capital, their boutique investment firm focusing on ethical business practices, had secured its first major clients. Daniel's financial acumen had returned in full force, sharper now with the perspective his hardships had given him. Alexis had discovered a talent for struggling companies without the human casualties typical of corporate turnarounds. Ava thrived in her new school, her health stable, her confidence growing. The 3 of them had developed routines and inside jokes, favorite restaurants, and weekend traditions. They weren't a conventional family, but they'd built something that worked, something honest. On a crisp autumn evening, they walked together through Millennium Park after a client dinner. Ava ran ahead to the Cloudgate sculpture, leaving Daniel and Alexis momentarily alone. "Do you ever regret it?" Daniel asked, the question that occasionally still surfaced, walking away from everything you built. Alexis watched Ava's reflection multiply infinitely in the curved metal surface. "I didn't walk away from what mattered," she answered, her hand finding his. "I just finally understood what was worth building." They stood together, watching Ava laugh at her distorted reflection. 2 people who had lost everything, only to discover that new beginnings sometimes arrive in the most unexpected moments. Like when a janitor stands up in a boardroom and changes the course of many lives with a single courageous truth. Sometimes the most valuable deals we make aren't signed on paper, but written in the heart, with courage, second chances, and the family we choose along the way. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and like this video for more healing stories that remind us what truly matters in life. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below.